Hello. You've probably read from time to time one of those gloomy forecasts in the papers to the effect that the world in another, say, 1 million years will be one vast ice cube completely frozen over, or on the contrary, one vast fireball burnt to a crisp. And nobody gets very much worked up about it. 1 million years is a fair distance away. I'm beginning to feel that a lot of us, myself included, have been guilty of the same amount of apathy and remoteness about a threat that can and may happen in our own lifetimes in the cities where we live in this country. I mean A-bombs and H-bombs falling on Canadian cities. We hope that will never happen. But today, Window on Canada will show us a movie dealing with that terrible possibility, and then we'll talk it over with a noted Canadian who knows more about these matters, I'm sure, than any other Canadian, Major General Frank Worthington, Civil Defense Coordinator for Canada. General Worthington, how long have you been Civil Defense Chief?
6.5 years.
And before that, you were in the Army as a professional soldier. How long?
About 35 years.
I imagine you've learned things about A-bombs and H-bombs in the last couple of years that would have staggered your imagination as a young lieutenant, right?
Yes, you're right about that, all right.
Of course, you've had a unique opportunity to observe these things. You've been at the atom tests in Nevada, and haven't you been closely in touch with the mock air raids and the mass evacuations in Canadian cities?
That's right, all of them.
Well, we have some questions for you, General. But first, let's look at this movie about A-bombs and H-bombs, maybe someday in Canada. The title of this film is The Homeless Ones. And here it is.
This is a film that could not be photographed, because its events, fortunately, exist only in the human mind, exploring grim possibilities of the future. But they can and may happen. In modern warfare, no community is immune to attack from the air. And the weapon would be a bomb, perhaps high explosive, perhaps the atom bomb, perhaps the H-bomb. Let us look midway among these horrors. An atom bomb falling on a modern city would create great destruction over an area up to nearly 2 miles from the blast center, ranging from severe damage to heavy damage to nearly total destruction at ground zero. the blast center, there would be few, if any, survivors of atomic attack. Ruin, desolation, the silence of death. The dreadful blast shadows of vanished victims, imprinted by radiation on streets and walls. But immediately around the blast center, in a region of heavy damage where many people would be killed, injured, or trapped in debris, the civil defense forces would be at work. Rescue squads would cope with grim problems. They would have little time for anything but their own vital tasks. The rescue workers would have little time for those who were confused, frightened, panic-stricken. These people would be the concern of civil defense welfare service workers, whose job it is to look after those who can still walk, but who need help after disaster. Their work is to prevent panic and restore order by helping people to recover from the shock and dislocation of attack. The survival of any city will depend on the speed with which this is done. And with organization and forethought, it can be done. In organizing a region for civil defense, let's take a community which, for one reason or another, could be an objective of enemy attack. It's called a target area. That's the city itself, the target area. The region immediately around the city, including nearby towns and villages, is called the mutual aid area. The region surrounding this is called the reception and mobile support area. If the city is very large, the mutual aid area may extend as far as 50 miles and may be divided into sub-areas according to road and rail communications, township and county boundaries, and so on. These areas will provide help for the stricken city and shelter for the homeless if it is needed. And here is the city, the target area. For civil defense organization purposes, it is divided up according to the location of that part which might be subject to the most severe effects of a bomb attack. This is called the critical area. It may be a war plant, an industrial district, a railway yard, a canal. But the various civil defense subdivisions will radiate out from it, each containing part of the critical area. Each subdivision should have prospective civil defense welfare centers selected and registered with the Civil Defense Director as part of the civil defense program. There might be several centers for each subdivision of a large city, covering a huge, heavily populated area, each center selected ahead of time for possible use in a given district. Generally, the centers would be towards the outskirts, and each center would be a large building or group of buildings. And as no one knows where a bomb may fall, for every center earmarked in advance, another should be designated in case the first choice is destroyed. Partway between each center and the target area would be assembly areas. These might be parks or schoolyards. The assembly areas serve as connecting links between the welfare centers and the region of destruction. Organization must extend right to the neighborhood level. In every block, at least one woman should be appointed and trained as a welfare aide to the warden. In forward areas, these block workers will help handle dazed and confused people and direct and guide the homeless to the nearest welfare assembly area. welfare assembly areas would be established by people in their immediate neighborhood, trained for the emergency, or by teams sent out from the nearest welfare center immediately after the attack. The assembly area is an intermediate point, a gathering place, and its purpose is to prevent panic and confusion by providing organized effort to gather groups of homeless people together. Here they can be given temporary attention and then sent on their way to the welfare center farther back. Transportation will be provided here for old people, invalids, and children. So the flow of homeless from the devastated region will be toward the assembly areas, and from there to the welfare centers. The great task of civil defense welfare services is to prevent a breakdown of civilian morale. The welfare center provides organized help in a time of fear and confusion. And so the reception area of the center should be prepared to find out the immediate needs of the people as soon as they arrive. The reception workers should be able to give information and active help quickly and efficiently. In the medical aid section, volunteer workers with first aid training should be on hand to attend to cases of hysteria, collapse, or minor injury. Serious cases can be given temporary care before being taken to hospitals by other civil defense workers. The emergency feeding section provides food and drink for the homeless when they arrive at the center. Most of these people will be physically and emotionally upset, and a hot drink will help calm and reassure them. On a long-range basis, the emergency feeding work calls for a good deal of organization and supply, but its immediate function after an attack is simple: to have plenty of hot drinks ready as quickly as possible and facilities for serving the incoming crowds. In the emergency clothing section, the demands would be very great if an attack took place at night or in wintertime. Even in a daytime attack, many night workers might be asleep at the time of the blast. Other people might have their clothes badly torn or burned. As soon as emergency needs are met, comes the work of the registration and inquiry section. Everyone arriving at the center should be registered. By cooperation with other centers and other civil defense services, this provides a record of survivors and helps bring families together. Mass lodging would be the heaviest problem facing civil defense welfare services. There must be emergency provision for shelter at the center, again with special reference to the possibility of disaster at night or in winter weather. All this means that the center must have a big crew of workers. The personnel staff would have a vital job in finding the right people for the many tasks to be done and in controlling their activities. Key people would be registered long in advance. There would be need for people accustomed to the handling of food, clothing, and stores, and for people trained in communications. As soon as the first shock has passed, it will be possible to make use of housing surveys and reports from block wardens to find lodgings for the homeless. Rehabilitation would be the big task, so that essential workers can get back to their jobs and production restored. So the welfare center becomes a clearinghouse. Some people may be able to return to their own homes. Unaccompanied children are taken to children's institutions, foster homes, or to relatives. The transport section would have a big job, not only in bringing homeless people and staff workers to and from the center, but in taking people to support areas and bringing back supplies and workers. Welfare centers in communities outside the city, in the mobile support area, will be vitally important, especially in the event of H-bomb attack, with its relatively greater destruction. These communities may be called upon to provide refuge for people from several hundred miles away. Towns failing to plan for such an emergency may be swamped, but with proper organization, with a welfare center already selected and a staff ready to swing into action, the plight of the homeless can be handled in an orderly way. By an advance home survey, it should be possible to billet new arrivals soon after they register at the center, after their immediate needs have been cared for. The welfare center in the support area town has a two-way job: to receive the homeless and to send aid to the stricken area. The center would be a headquarters for collecting supplies, equipment, and clothing. And from here would go trained teams of workers to help operate civil defense welfare services at the scene of devastation. As workers and supplies arrive from the support area in the bombed city, its centers will face the problem of prolonged operation, finding food and shelter for the homeless over a period of time. Each center will be the busiest place in its area. On a 24-hour day basis, each center will need 3 people for every job, trained people if possible, because there will be a use for every ability and skill. Even if you can offer to do no more than carry messages, if there's a civilian defense welfare services organization in your community, your name should be on their lists today, so that you can be of help in time of disaster and suffering, whether in time of peace or time of war. From all walks of life will come the people who may be needed in communities large and small. In a city of 50,000, the Civil Defense Organization would need roughly 7% of the population, or about 3,500 workers. Of these volunteers, welfare services would require about 20%, or perhaps 700 workers, ready to give their abilities and experience in time of emergency. This could be your community, as not yet seen by the camera's eye, as it may never be seen. But if disaster should come, it will never be as bad as it might be, if it is met by people organized, by people trained, by people prepared.
Well, General, even to a man like yourself in close touch with that sort of thing, that must be a pretty frightening picture. Tell me, is it at all alarmist or fanciful? Has the artist exaggerated the truth of the matter?
No. Not at all. It's based on factual experience and factual data.
Well, you're a civil defense organization in Canada. Were you called in on helping to make the picture? Were you advisors on it?
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Well, General, the first argument that some people advance against your plan is that maybe it's already too late to put this thing into operation because it would just take too long to get this immense organization of people operating across the country. Is that true?
Oh, no. We've got to look at that in its proper perspective. For example, there's a nucleus of civil defense organization in every town and city in Canada right now. Let us take begin with your mayor and your civic officials. They're elected there as responsible for the welfare of the people put there. You've got a police force, you've got a fireman, you've got medical office of health, welfare. Then you have many other agencies, such as the service clubs, like the Rotaries and those people.
Even the public utilities, I suppose.
Public utilities.
Waterworks. Yeah.
Waterworks. All that is the essence, or the hard core of a good civil defense organization.
I suppose even radio cabs, that sort of thing.
Yes, they're being used very extensively across the country. But in order to meet with a great disaster, they have to be augmented by a large number of volunteers, citizen volunteers, men and women who are willing to receive some training in what they can do.
Mm-hmm. In other words, then, we do have channels now for civil defense, and it's merely a matter of using them and expanding them.
It's a matter of using, expanding, and organizing and developing plans to meet with the disaster.
Well, tell me, how many volunteers are needed for this work across the country? Do you have an estimate on that?
We figure that if we could get 250,000 men and women to volunteer and take place there, we'd be in pretty good shape.
Well, now, what about the person who has just seen the movie and would like to join up in civil defense right tomorrow morning? How does he do that, General? Where does he go?
Well, see the local civil defense organization in the town, find the number in the phone book, and if not, phone the mayor's office. If they have a civil defense, they'll tell them where to go.
Well, now, General, a friend of mine was giving me his viewpoint on this matter the other day, and I feel that his attitude probably is a fairly general one. He said, I know that it sounds like apathy and probably poor citizenship and so on, but the way it seems to me, the cost of trying to defend our country against A bombs and H bombs, the cost would be so enormous, and the regimentation, the martial law, the stern discipline that would have to prevail would be so harsh that I just as soon chuck the whole thing and take my chances of surviving. I don't want to live under those conditions. Now, that may be apathy, there may be some other word for it, but how do you feel about that quite prevalent attitude?
Well, I think that attitude is completely wrong, the wrong attitude. In the first place, the cost, as I explained, the cost is largely borne by what we have already in existence. There are certain other costs, but they're not overburdening. And as far as regimentation, let's take the example of some of the disasters we've had. Let's take the case of the Fraser Valley floods in 1948.
In British Columbia.
In British Columbia. Well, now, there was certain, if you want to call it regimentation, it wasn't really, but the people themselves had to be taken to places to be taken care of, very much like you saw in the picture here.
And they have defense measures ever since against possible new floods, haven't they?
They've had it ever since that. They have the measures there to avoid the same thing happening again. And I can assure you, if it happened again, there wouldn't be the loss of property and that occurred there at that time.
I believe, General, you have said on one or two occasions in public that the situation is somewhat the same as that of a community existing on the slope of a volcano. There may never be another eruption, but on the other hand, you've got to have some sort of plan of action in case there is.
That's correct. That's correct. That's a good, sensible, and good simile of what we're driving at right now.
All right, now, tell me, General, in a broad way, what is the civil defense plan in Canada? I suppose you people have everything pretty well blueprinted.
Yes, we have it blueprinted. That is our, what we might call, we don't call it that, a survival plan. Mm-hmm. It's in 4 phases. One is to remove certain categories of people from the heavy density populated areas. I'm not talking all cities, but heavy density.
Yes.
That is the children and aged people and mothers and so forth. And then the number two is in the event of immediate possible attack, almost a total evacuation from the center of the cities. And number three is the sorting out people, much as we've seen in that picture there. After we get them, they're out, sorting them out, getting the families together, getting them back into reasonable living conditions. And the fourth is the rehabilitation. And that, of course, is a long-term policy.
Well, what has been the public response up to now in these mock raids and air raid drills in various Canadian cities? Has there been the same apathy and perhaps ridicule that we've been talking about?
No.
The people took it seriously, did they?
I would say the larger percentage of the people have taken it quite seriously once they get to know what it's all about. Otherwise, we've had good success in those things, and they couldn't be successful unless the people cooperated, and, of course, the civic officials.
And I take it
Very gratifying.
And there's been no attempt to make the thing jocular. Nobody has ridiculed this thing.
Well, there are always people who ridicule anything.
Yes.
But the bulk of the population have been splendid.
Well, General, what about the so-called white elephant argument? I mean, the people who say, suppose the efforts of the diplomats are successful, and in 5 or 10 years, the threat of atomic warfare is permanently removed. Canada, in the meantime, has been spending millions of dollars in your civil defense plan. Now, will that be a waste? Will it be a white elephant, or what?
I don't agree with that argument for 1 minute. In the first place, what are we aiming at in civil defense? We're aiming to produce a disaster plan to meet disaster, to avoid panic. Furthermore, when we're talking about spacing and development of things, we then provide a better way of life for people. The cities today are too crowded. We know it. And they represent danger spots, even if nothing happens in the way of war.
I take it then that you civil defense people feel that your plan is not by any means a panic measure, that these things you advocate should be done anyway in Canada, even if no bomb ever falls, right?
Absolutely. Is what we need today in the modern age. We've got to be prepared for any disaster, anything that may occur. And that is one way of doing it. And furthermore, as an educational program, I'm convinced that if we have a good civil defense organization in this country, what we'll gain will be all profit to the nation.
Thank you, General. Our guest today has been General Frank Worthington, Civil Defense Coordinator for Canada. He has looked at the picture of the homeless ones with you and me and given us the viewpoint of the Civil Defense Group on these problems. My name is Clyde Gilmore. So long for now, and I'll be seeing you next time.